It's a few minutes after 7 o'clock. I'll open up the October 30th meeting of the Hamilton Planning Board. The other thing on our agenda tonight is to have a kickoff meeting regarding the revision to the housing portion of our master plan. Jen Goldson is here tonight to start that off. Patrick, I'll give you the mic for a few minutes just to kind of, for the people that are watching, if there are any, just to update everybody on how we got to this point and why we're here. So the mic is yours.
Good evening. This is Patrick Reffett. I'm Director of Planning and Inspections. I did want to point out that the funds that we have available to us have been made available through the CPA committee, as well as the Finance Committee, as well as the Board of Selectmen have approved those funds for this use. We were provided with a $30,000 allotment that we are going to be using the majority of for this purpose. We'd like to welcome everybody, even though they're not here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mark, for coming. I know that a lot of people are interested. We are filming tonight, so speak close to the microphones if you would. We began the master plan process, at least discussion about the revision, some time ago, but it became highly apparent to us after we had some zoning bylaws that went to town meeting that were focusing on residential growth and development, and people didn't support them. And it was a really pivotal moment for the board and myself to understand we really need to get people to better understand the process, to understand with us what our community is, where we want it to go. We do have extensive land reserves in the community, but that's what makes this community the special community that it is. I know that we are at 3% subsidized housing inventory. That's going to be part of the discussion, but one of the important things that the board is really focused on is that we really want to talk and focus on obtaining what we call attainable housing for seniors, for young couples, for young professionals, for our kids, for elders. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons why we want to begin to look at the broad context of our housing market here in town, but we have a lot of people in the community that don't exactly want to live in a 4,000 square foot home. They like to downsize, and their kids would like to be in a space that is more affordable to them. So there are a lot of reasons why we're here. The housing, or the regular master plan that the community approved was dated 2004. So we're about 14 years later. It's definitely time to update it, and we're excited that people are at least providing us some support monetarily for us, and we look forward to moving it ahead. So we began preparing a scope of services with the board several months ago. The board approved it, and then, as I say, we got funds from the CPA, and then we advertised it according to state law, etc. But we were lucky enough to get Jennifer Goldson and Judy Barrett interested in the project. We had one other proposal that came from a company called COG. Their name escapes me.
Opportunities Group.
Yeah, exactly. Community Opportunities Group. But working through the evaluation process, Rick, Janelle, and myself felt like we had the best proposal with Jennifer and Judy. So we've gone through all the contracting paperwork, and we're happy that Jennifer and Judy are working with us. I'd like to personally welcome Jennifer being with us tonight. She'll be speaking on behalf of the firm.
Thank you. Please, Jennifer.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm Jen Goldson. I have a very short PowerPoint. It's really mostly to help me focus my comments to you so that I'm organized about what we're saying. But you should feel free to interrupt anytime, ask questions along the way. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about our team. I'll talk about a master plan fundamentals and how I view this project scope and schedule. And you can tell me if you think I've got the scope and schedule right. And then I want to run through an exercise with you, if you'll humor me in this, and really ask you some questions that I hope you'll all participate in answering, and you all can decide if you also want some audience participation. That would be welcome by me. And we're going to talk about your hopes and expectations for this project and the updates to the housing. So the housing element. I hate to say housing element because I know my scope is bigger than just the housing element, so I'll get into that. But it's not just your hopes and expectations for the project itself. My point is I want to get a little bit into the challenges and opportunities that you see around housing in this community. And so I'll guide you through those questions. But just to give you a heads up, that's what we'll kind of land on at the last slide. So I'm Jen Goldson. I have a company called J.M. Goldson, just my name, Jennifer Marie Goldson. I started it about 12 years ago. It's a very small firm. We've grown from me working out of a home office for the first 9 years to having a small practice with 2 other full-time professionals, including, in addition to me, as well as a part-time planning assistant. And our office is downtown near Symphony Hall. If you're ever in the area, let me know. You're welcome to stop by and say hi. And you'll be meeting someone else from my firm. Her name is Adrienne, and she'll be assisting me very deeply with this project. So you'll see both of us a lot. And then the other member of my team is Judy Barrett. She's a subconsultant on the project, and I'll explain her role a little bit. But the 3 people you'll be seeing are the 3 people up here, me, Adrienne, and Judy. And so my firm is the lead consultant. We'll be managing the project as well as the process. We'll be preparing an existing conditions analysis, and I'll get more into the scope in a few minutes, but just to give you a sense of how we've broken out between the 2 different firms. We'll also be designing and facilitating focus groups, a community survey, and public forums. And we'll be preparing the master plan updates. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then Barrett Planning Group, who is Judy Barrett, is a subconsultant. She's a specialist in a lot of areas, but in this particular project, we brought her in as a fiscal impact specialist, and we know that that was an important part of your scope. And so she'll be preparing a fiscal impact analysis at the right time in our scope, and I'll show you that, where we think that is. She'll be also present at both public forums and assisting us with part of the presentation and helping us with exercises there. And then she'll also be assisting with the preparation of master plan elements, particularly with regard to the fiscal impact piece of it. So as Patrick had said, thank you for that introduction, by the way. It was nice and thorough and gave a nice frame to what I wanted to say. I know that your last master plan was in 2004, and we've reviewed, the level of detail and sort of the general objectives. And then we also know 2013 is your last housing production plan, and that was done by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And so what we'll be looking at is, well, number one, are there other documents? You don't have to answer this as rhetorical, but we'll be following up with Patrick to see if there's anything else that we should be really looking at, any other recent studies, anything that you think is relevant to the work that we're doing. We want to make sure that we're not redoing anything or, reinventing the wheels on anything. So, and what we really want to figure out is what's changed since you've done these plans, what remains the same. What do community members value now? Might be the same thing, might be different. and how do they envision the future. And so the way we view a master plan is it provides you with a way to respond to change over time. We all know that everything in life, including our communities, are changing. And so we want to be deliberate about shaping that change rather than just reacting to that change. And so having a master plan is a way to respond to change over time. It looks at the physical evolution of a community, although a lot of master plans also look at social issues and services in addition to the physical evolution. It's usually 10 to 20 years out. We can talk about if you have a specific time horizon in mind, but that's typical. And it ends up being a policy document that's used by local officials to help in decisions. We also like to create systems-oriented plans, so we were glad to see that in the scope of work you described, you didn't just ask us to update the housing element, you asked us to look at all the elements in the 2004 plan and see how housing fits into those elements, and really look at more of a global update to any other elements that relate to housing. So as you probably know, there are 7 statutory elements. Housing is one. And our primary purpose is looking at the housing element and updating that. But the scope also includes, as I just mentioned, updates to other master plan elements. And you said in your RFP, in particular, you want us to look at the community facilities and services element, which of course ties into you also asking for the fiscal impact analysis. And so we have essentially 4 very broad steps that we'll go through, and I'll break this down in more detail in a moment. But one is to prepare an existing conditions analysis. We want to understand where you are right now. What are your housing needs? How have they either changed or stayed the same since you last analyzed that in 2013 in your housing production plan? Are there other things that we should bring into the existing conditions analysis that prior plans maybe didn't expect or didn't incorporate for any reason? 2 would be to really understand what are the issues and opportunities here, and we'll talk about how we go about doing that. 3 is to develop a vision, goals, and strategies around housing and related items to housing. And then the 4th is to draft the draft and final plan and figure out which elements you want us to revise. And so when we start with the existing conditions, it's really we're asking a bunch of questions and we're trying to find the answers to them. Same with identifying issues and opportunities. So some of these questions, parts of these questions can be answered through data and facts, and other parts of these questions can be answered through figuring out where the community is, what are the issues, what are the opportunities here. And so we ask things like, who's living here now? How has that changed over time? Who's expected to live in the community in the near future? How much is the community aging? How much are people moving out when they age? What housing needs does both the current and then the anticipated future population have, to the extent that we can predict what the future population is? What is the composition and character of your housing stock? What kinds of housing are encouraged by your regulations, your land use regulations, and what kinds of housing is discouraged? What housing needs do those regulations and policies meet, and what kind of housing needs do they not meet? And is there a gap in what you allow in the community versus what your needs are for now and the future population? And then what opportunities exist for Hamilton to address those unmet needs? And the opportunities look at things like your regulations, your land availability, but it also looks at opportunities in terms of political opportunities and what's feasible here, and how does that relate to your community facilities and services. And again, we know that the fiscal impact is an important part of this. So all of those are tied together in those questions. Once we feel like we have the facts and the issues and the opportunities pretty well established, then we go out to the community in a broader way and we share what we've learned, but we also ask them to envision an ideal future for Hamilton. What does that look like with regard to housing? How could this community be at its very best with regard to housing? And what we want to encourage people to think about is something that perhaps it's a stretch from what they think is kind of the everyday politically feasible answers, but still in the realm of the achievable. So we want people to be hopeful and optimistic, but ultimately figure out a way to respond to change over time in a way that's realistic. And so when we think about a vision, it's really both. It's how can we be idealistic and also realistic, and how can we find that balance of what we're looking for to strive towards. And from that vision, we look at developing goals. And this is where we talk a lot about those tensions that are inherent really in any plan like this, whether you're thinking about a master plan in all of its elements or just looking at housing. The tension is always between community progress, about change, and about preservation. And the nuances are different in each community, but that's what it gets back to at its heart. And so the question is, how is it that Hamilton could do what it takes to reach its vision? And it's a push and a pull, and it's a tug of war, and figuring out where are the goals that feel right for this community. And it's not an easy answer, and that's where the community engagement becomes a very important piece. And then from the goals, we look at what kind of strategies can be realistic to meet those goals. And this is when we get down to more of the nitty-gritty. So we work closely with this group and the community members through the public forum to really look at what strategies are practical, what are the fiscal impacts of different strategies, and how can we make choices that are smart for the community. We would look at regulatory changes, potentially, physical improvements, programming, and services. Those are the general categories. And then we look at, well, how do you fund those things? Or what steps do you need to do to undertake those? Who would be in charge of those? And what's the process that you'd go through? How important are these in a timeline of 10 to 20 years, whatever we decide is our planning horizon? What gets done in year 1, year 2, versus what gets done in year 20 or year 10? And so we look at all of those things when we're looking at how you do it. So let me just pause there before I get into the project schedule. I just went through some very general things about master plans, and I know we're looking at a piece of a master plan, but I think all of those things are relevant, even though we're looking at a piece of a whole master plan. Do you have any questions or thoughts so far before I get into the schedule and the more particulars about the scope?
I don't think so.
Okay, so in terms of the schedule, this is the same thing that you have as a handout in your packet. It's called the Revised Scope of Services. I do have some extra copies, but I understand that you have them in your packet. I don't know if anyone in the audience would like a copy of this, or if you have it already. You have it?
I don't.
You need it, okay. So here's a few. That should be enough. If it's not, I have more. So this is the same scope on the slide that's in your paper. It's just in a different visual format and a little bit less detailed on the slide. And so you'll see that we're in the first part of the left, the dark blue, which is November to December, doing the existing conditions analysis. We'll be updating the demographic profile, the housing characteristics, and the development constraints. And this is largely work that we'll do in our office and send to you when we're done in December. And then in December, so this overlaps, December, mid-December, and I'll talk more details and dates on the next slide, but mid-December through January, we'll be conducting focus groups and launching a community survey, and that's really to explore more about issues and opportunities. And then February to March, we would be working with the community in a more grand scale, holding 2 community forums, and in between those 2, doing a fiscal impact analysis, where we're really focusing on what's your vision for housing, what are your goals, and what are the strategies, and what are the fiscal impacts around those strategies, and how can we make smart choices around those. And then April through May is when we're drafting the report and finalizing the report. And we'll be working with you on reviews and then having a final presentation at the end of the process. This is a much more detailed schedule. I like to get down to a level where we're really talking about dates. at the kickoff meeting, and you don't have to give me an answer right now, but my next step would be to work with Patrick or the chair or whomever you want me to work with to really pin down dates. I like to pin down dates early in the process, as you know from the efforts to try to set up this kickoff meeting where both Judy and I could attend was a difficult task, and the longer we wait to set dates, the harder it gets to get the folks that you want at these meetings at the meeting. So I like to be very organized, pinning down every date we can, if it's possible, in our scope of work when we first start out. And so that's what we plan to do over the next, few days to a week. But these are the ideas that I had. And if you think that those ideas, don't work in general, we can talk about them now. But I think in terms of specific dates, we could do that behind the scenes. So tonight is the kickoff meeting. Next week is a community tour where Judy Barrett will also be present. That's on Monday, 12:30. And, we can talk about logistics of who's coming, but Judy and I will be there with Patrick, and we'd love to get a sense of the community from your eyes. We will submit our deadline that we are proposing to you tonight is to submit existing conditions update to you on the 14th of December, and we would provide you with a cover memo on that, just describing some of the key findings. But we'd love for you to review that over the course of the rest of December maybe, and we can talk about when we need comments back. But if you had the rest of the December to review it and give us comments, that would be a fine timeline for us. We want you to take a careful look at it. We don't want you to feel rushed. We know that the holidays are in there, but, we also feel like sometimes people have downtime and don't mind reading an existing conditions report over some time that maybe they're not working every day. So as a general thought, if you think that that's a problem, let us know. The following week after we submit the draft existing conditions analysis, we'd like to hold 2 half-days of focus groups. And so it would be 8 total 1-hour focus groups. And what we would suggest, and it's really more up to you and not us, that you come up with an invite list for these focus groups. And we would suggest a combination of town officials that you think we should hear their perspectives and community members. It could be neighbors who've been involved with housing proposals that either they're happy about or unhappy about. It could be other community members. We'd like to have a variety of perspectives. We'd like to try to get a cross-section of perspectives from the community by thinking about who can come to these focus groups. And the focus groups would be no more than 5 people in the room at a time with us. They're not public meetings. They're not a quorum of any group. It's just a way for us to get the kind of the down and dirty. We want to hear the issues, want to hear the opportunities from the folks that know in the community, because they've either been involved in an official capacity or they've been involved as neighbors, concerned citizens, housing authority tenants. I mean, you can create this list very strategically, but we just want to understand the various perspectives in the community around housing issues and opportunities. And how you structure it is, we can give you some advice, but we'd really like for you to determine who these folks are and what groupings you have them in. And so sometimes communities want me to meet with all objectors to a certain proposal in one group, and that's fine. Other times they want to mix it up so that I hear different perspectives in each focus group. Other times it's just a matter of practicality. Some people can only come at night, and so we'll hold some of them in evening hours, or some people may prefer an early morning before they head to work, or some people who maybe work for the town prefer that we're here during the day. And so we'd want to be strategic about that as well. But the time we'd like to give you is 2 4-hour blocks over the course of 2 separate days during that week. And so typically what communities will do is they'll schedule a morning through the workday. Like, so we might come at 7:30 or 7 and stay till, 10 or whatever. Did I just do my math wrong? Till 11. And do 4 then. So we get a little bit in the early morning before, I don't know what time people leave for work around here, and then into the day. And then we may come more towards the later end of the day. Maybe we come 4 to 8, the next block on another day. And so that we can get some evening hours in, or we could do 6 to 10's a little late, but we could do it if you want us to. 5 to 9. So we're pretty flexible, but we'd like you to think about that as well, about when people could probably come, what people you want us to speak with, and then we would just ask that the 4-hour blocks be contiguous. It's just efficient for us, to be honest. We do 1 hour, we keep them to about 50 minutes with a sometimes we go right up to the hour, but try to be pretty efficient. We have the questions prepared ahead of time. People want to see them. They're pretty broad questions. We have a map with us. And so it's just to get a small group of no more than 5 people in a room at the time talking with us. And it'll be a combination of me and or my associate who you haven't met yet, Adrian. And so we need to just work out our schedule, but it'll be one of us, probably not both of us. We may end up splitting it up so that she does one day, I do another. We need to talk through that. So to throw that out there, you don't need to decide right now, but before that, you'd probably want to give people at least 2 to 3 weeks lead time. So you'd want to decide it over the course of November, I would say. Come up with a list, tell us what times, which days, and if you have the days and the times earlier rather than later, we can hold them in our calendars, and then we can preserve them for you that week while you're trying to figure out who to invite and that type of thing. We're also happy to set up a doodle poll with the different time slots with no more than 5 in each. If we did that, then it would be up to folks to just sign up when they can, and you wouldn't have the ability to be as strategic about who's in the room together. So that's up to you. We've done it both ways, and we're happy to set that up if you think that that's easier to do it that way.
How do most places do it in terms of, you're saying we should pick, but do other towns have issues with the planning board choosing who does it versus some other method?
Well, I view you as my client group,
Yep.
and I think that you know your town pretty well and the various perspectives that you think that would be important for me to hear from. And so I think it makes sense for the planning board to at least offer names, and maybe Patrick finalizes it. You can also ask around. I don't know how involved other town officials will be in this process, but perhaps your town administrator wants to weigh in. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out. So in other towns, we've had the town planner or planning director be very involved in helping to pick it out, working perhaps just with the chair. In other communities, we've had planning board members throw out names, maybe just by email, and then having the chair and the planner finalize that. We've also had the planning board, or sometimes we work, on housing plans with the housing partnership or a housing trust. We'd have them deliberate in an open session and throw out names that way, and then assign it to the chair and whoever's staffing that committee. So it's worked in a bunch of different ways.
Find it better to have groups with mixed viewpoints or to have groups with a variety of
It can work both ways, and I've done it both ways. The thing that sometimes becomes challenging is if people don't feel they can talk to me openly by the fact of who else is in the room. If they feel that they have to be very guarded, then I just want to know what's going on, and I'm not in judgment mode or anything like that. And if people feel too guarded, then I don't get the information I'm looking for. So that's the only caveat that I'd have.
So it sounds like groups of like-minded people might be more honest with you as opposed to
Sometimes.
mixed groups.
Sometimes.
You'd probably get
It
more.
depends on the political atmosphere in the community, too, and how charged certain issues are.
I'd say we've got a pretty charged environment, so, and I think it's important to capture everybody's point of view, even those we may disagree with. I think it's important for them to be heard and feel that they're being heard and participating in it, so that we get an actual cross-section of opinion. So what I'm hearing is probably, what's the word I want? Not contiguous, like-minded people.
Yeah, and if you could just make sure we don't have a quorum of any one body.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to work with you. I don't mean to put this on you because I'm looking to get away from work. It's just that I can't come up with this list on my own.
No.
That's absolutely
Oh, I
fine.
think we can come up with
Yeah.
a pretty robust.
And no, I
list.
think we just want to make sure we do it in a fair way where, like you said, there's a really good cross-section of people,
Oh, yeah.
involved, so.
And this also, just, to put it in context, it's not the only chance. It's just our first time where we really want to be deliberate about hearing a cross-section. But we'll have, of course, the community survey, which we hope will be broadly responded to, and we'll have 2 public forums, which we hope that will be well attended. So there are definitely other places for people to engage in the process. So the next thing on this list is releasing a community survey, which we'd like to propose for the end of December and keep it live for 3 weeks. There's nothing magical about 3 weeks, but we find that if you haven't answered in 3 weeks, you're probably not going to answer. It gets a little dead being up there for too long. But we also know that this time of year people are distracted. We put it around this time because it worked with the process and the flow. But if you think it's important to shift that into January, we could do that. We can talk about that. It won't really hold us up necessarily. We just won't have, the community survey can provide us with insight on how to design the public forum. And it's ideal to have that input before we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of how are we going to design this, what kind of presentation do we think would be most helpful to people, what kind of information should we put out there. So we get a lot of information and ideas from the community survey. But if you think that that time of year is too problematic, we can certainly shift that into January.
Does the survey have to come after the focus groups?
Yes,
Okay.
because we get... we don't do anything boilerplate. We really customize all of our work. And so if we don't have a good understanding of the issues, then we may
Ask
not
the right
word the
questions.
survey in a way that makes sense to the community.
And
How is the
can you
survey-
talk about the vehicle for the survey?
So we typically use SurveyMonkey. And I know that we chatted during our award meeting about having, business cards. Then we can stand out at the commuter rail during rush hour in the morning. We can leave you with flyers and, so there'd be a link. If you feel that paper copies are important to also provide, we would just ask that we would need help by perhaps a volunteer. I don't know if you have a senior work program or what, but usually someone from the community will then input those answers into the SurveyMonkey for us. We like everything to be in SurveyMonkey because it gives us all the data in one place and we can quickly analyze everything that people are telling us. And so something to think about, and we're happy to provide you with the paper copies or work with you on that, but we would just need help from someone in town inputting those into SurveyMonkey.
Mark, what was the vehicle that you used for the first survey done?
First of all, it wasn't me, it was all 80 people in the master plan committee. It was a paper survey sent out to, mailed out to everybody. We had collection stations at before it was the shopping center, and before it was the shops. We had a collection center there, one at the town hall, and one at the library. So we had 3 places where paper returns could be dropped off. We had 520 or 560 responses to the paper, which surprised Judy at the time. And then we literally just tallied them all up. And then what was most interesting is that we took all the things people had written in the margins, because people hadn't been surveyed for such a long time. There were whole paragraphs in the margins, and we wrote them up as another 8-font, 20-page paper. So it was just very insightful to find out what people had to say. So, but it was a larger group.
Okay.
You also had some of your high school kids, your children, they went off in task force and delivered it to shut-ins and so forth.
So we were about to have the Boy Scouts drop them off, but they couldn't be comprehensive. So in the end, we just arranged pickup stations and encouraged it. We mailed some. I think the Council on Aging at the time was much smaller, but they gave us some names. So we mailed ones to people that had identified as being elderly. But it was a hodgepodge of how we got it out. By no means all 2,700 households.
What kind of response do you usually get?
It's varies so much. We just did one in the city of Chelsea, and we got like 60 people to respond. It was really a little bit depressing. But then we've done one in, I'm trying to remember, Concord. I'm trying to remember the numbers. It was a lot. I want to say it was 700 or 800. We just did one, I'm trying to remember which community it was, where we got like 300 or 400. I'm sorry, some of the communities blend together. That I don't remember which community it was, but it really varies, and it actually doesn't even relate as much to population size. It relates to how engaged the community is, and we do find that the response rates are usually very good in smaller communities that are highly engaged, and so, you know, I don't know about Hamilton, but I from what I gather, you're very engaged, and we'll probably get a high response rate.
So how does it work? Does they have to go online?
Yeah,
Or do they
so
get
we
an
don't.
email from the town? So is
Well,
there any
it
way
would
to
be
do that?
both. I mean, I would suggest both, that you
Right.
do email blasts with the link. That's just click and you're there. You can do it on your phone, iPad, whatever. It's custom, you know, it's. You know, in terms of the paper, what we do is we like to hand out business cards because they're easy. We can hand them out at the commuter rail, at wherever you'd like us. We can leave you stacks of them, or you can do flyers as well with the link on them. And, you know, I don't know if the town has Facebook or uses Twitter or any social media, but you can blast the link that way as well. You know, once a week or whatever, you can think about the right rhythm, but get it out there more than once. You can do a write-up in your local paper, have somebody interview Brian or I don't know who about this process and note that there's this plan, and then it goes online on the paper's website and you provide them with the link. So just different ideas, so it's really, you know, the link. And it would be on the website, but it would be the link on the website.
Speaking of Facebook, there's one,
Microphone.
Mike?
there's one Facebook for the town, and then there are a couple of there's at least 4 different Facebook pages that are community-oriented for different things, of which at least 2 or 3 of them would be a valid way to post on a regular basis.
That's great. So, you know.
Could I ask,
Oh, sure.
how are you going to handle the 40B question? Our town meeting grappled with it and came out a certain way. Mark is a specialist in knowing how to buy down and change densities and so forth. So, but what are we going to assume? Are we going to assume that eventually there will be a major 40B project or not?
You know, I'm not sure how to answer your question. I think that
I don't know how to ask it.
I think 40B and the fact that you only have, 3% on the subsidized housing, you know, it's certainly an issue in the community, and you're more vulnerable because of that. So I think it'll be an issue that we grapple with in this plan, but I don't view this plan just about 40B, getting to 10%. You know, you didn't ask us to do a housing production plan. You asked us to look at housing as part of the bigger picture in your community, and I feel like 40B is a piece of that, but not the whole thing. So I don't know how to answer your question.
I think it's
yeah.
all going to come out in surveys and the community, in the forums and so forth, because that is the hot button issue right now here, right? So I think it's all going to come out, and I think it's actually going to be inherent on you guys to be able to almost refocus it back to the other parts of housing that we're talking about, right? Because I think that's going to be one of the big things that people are engaged with, and it's not going to be so much the the attainable housing as we're talking about, and other types of housing that people may or may not want.
I think one of the things that interests me a lot is, can the 40B housing that we provide really have a large community share? Because if we're doing it for our seniors in this population, we're solving a problem. If we're trying to import 200 new families, that's an entirely different change in our whole population and how it functions.
I think in reality, that's getting way into the woods way before we need to. I think that's one of the problems that will come up in the forums, and this is just an introductory session, and I think it's way too early to start thinking about how that's going to work out in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and I think, Peter, I think a lot of this is going to be an I see this as an education process as opposed to a forum on, whether you like 40B or you don't like 40B and where it should be and all those kinds of questions that the town has struggled with. I think people have a lot of misconceptions about affordable housing under Chapter 40B. Who are the income groups that are eligible and what, and we saw that, as you remember at town meeting, when we were talking about cottage housing. And unfortunately, it all got blended together because we were saying, well, this is more affordable housing, and we meant more attainable housing because those units, even in the best of circumstances, would have been selling for $300,000 or $400,000. Now, but as you heard at town meeting, we're going, well, we don't want to look like Lynn, and we don't want those people moving into our town. Well, we're talking about $300,000 and $400,000 housing. That's, relatively high end. So I think people just don't have an understanding of, what it is and what it is not, and who lives there and who doesn't, and what are the community impacts that other what are the fiscal, educational, infrastructure impacts that other towns have seen from various types of housing, including 40B. So I think it's an element. I don't think it's a, all-encompassing. We're not going to get an answer. We're going to say, here's some information.
Well, I agree with your educational idea.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. So one of the ways, I just want to remind everybody that one of the ways we used the 2004 product is it drove the planning board to go on about a 10-year plan for different bylaws. So we put in our senior housing bylaw, we did the inclusionary bylaw, we had our great estates bylaw, it just led a bunch of things, and each one then led to little sub battles along the way. But starting out with, it set a direction for what policy, and that was all founded on the surveys that we did, and all the forum that we did. So I'm hoping that coming out of this, we'll have some goals for the planning board for, yes, the survey says let's have a cottage bylaw, or let's do something different for our accessory housing, so I'm hoping that we get some direction based on the input, which the community can rally around and do those without the battles necessarily that we found, because we found the planning board got ahead of the community. In 2002, the community was so far ahead of the planning board. The planning board had the master survey, and suddenly it was ahead of the community by about 10 years as far as public policy. So now I don't know where we're at, because so it'd be really good to sort of benchmark community and the planning board on the same spot, figuring out what bylaws we need, and then step forward from there.
Right, you're absolutely right, and that's for those of the people out there that don't know, that's the one reason we did this, was because we discovered that a lot of the objectives and goals had been met from 2004, up until now. So that was one reason we wanted to spearhead this effort, and really just focus on the housing piece of the master plan. Some people are like, just do the whole thing at once, but housing right now is probably the biggest issue that we have. So that's the main reason.
And it really drives everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
And I think part of the education that would be helpful is being able to think about the different segments of the community. So it's not just 40B, but they're all different kinds of populations, and so the need to have just more diverse housing. And if we can identify and educate people on what those different groups are, I think it would help.
So you're already getting into some of my discussion questions. You might have to repeat yourself, because I'm not taking notes yet until I take this presentation down. Then I can take my notes. But let's just finish the schedule, and then I think the very next thing is asking you those questions. So where were we? So meeting 2 to review progress would be January. I just proposed January 15th. It looked like that might be a regular meeting day, although I was unsure because the 1st was a Tuesday, and I wasn't sure of your January schedule.
Yeah, it'd probably be the 22nd.
Okay. I just picked that because I thought it was a regular date. It's nothing magical for me, so we can shift that to whatever your regularly scheduled date is around that time.
It's pretty magical for me. It's my birthday.
The 15th? Oh, okay. Well, we can't meet then. And then the week of early February, we don't have a specific date, but we'd like to pin that down soon. We're proposing that that would be a good week in terms of the general schedule to have the first public forum. And at that public forum, we would really be starting to do visioning and goal setting and talking about strategies to some extent, but more talking about things to consider. And Judy will give a presentation about fiscal impact considerations and how you look at different strategies. And it'll be more of a general overview. It's really a teaching moment. And but the forum will be very interactive. I'm just saying that piece for Judy is a teaching moment there, so that when we go out and do, look at different residential scenarios over the course of the following months, February to March, we'll be looking at the fiscal impacts of those scenarios and then coming back to public forum number 2, and that's where we're really showing these are different effects of different residential densities, different scenarios. Now let's talk about priorities and strategies that you think are realistic for the community. And so that's what Public Forum 2 is about. So they're not repeating, they're really building on each other, and we would like for people to come to both, I guess, as part of it. But certainly if someone misses the first one, we would never discourage them from coming to the second. And so I took the timeline to there because after that, we're really drafting the work, the housing element and the other elements to update, working with you, and then having a final presentation. And that takes us into, into May. So any questions about the general schedule or do you want to, give me any comments on the general dates? Do you feel like they're relatively good?
I'm thinking just, you might, on the survey, you might want to start January 2nd and move it out, just so it's like 3.
I think that can work, yeah.
It just so people are back from their 2-week vacation and, they're plugged back into work and.
Yeah, I think that can work fine.
Yeah, but a lot of people are off at that time too, so it gives them an opportunity, if they get it, if they're sitting around drinking their morning coffee on the 28th, trying to figure out what to do for the rest of the day. Maybe they'll sit there and, here's a survey I just got from Patrick, maybe I should fill it out.
You could, we could be ready to go on the 28th and you could release it, and then you could do another hard release on the 2nd, and really strategically kind of push it out again.
Yeah, I think like the handing out of the cards like you're talking about can happen after the first, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't do the week of that week because nobody's,
No.
yeah. We would pick a day that makes people are kind of back in motion. And, yeah. The other thing we can do is I say live for 3 weeks, but if we feel like there aren't enough responses, we can always keep it open another week and try to get the word, do another strong push to get it out. So we can, I could stay in touch with Patrick about what's the response like. We can see all the responses, so we can tell you how many are responding. We can tell you if you're missing a certain demographic. We can look and see, well, nobody over 75 has responded. Maybe we should have a push at the senior center. I don't even know. I'm sorry. You don't even know if you have a senior center. You do. Good. So we can, kind of after 10 days or something, we can sort of check in, see who's been responding. Is there a way to be more strategic to get more diverse perspectives or more people responding?
So does that mean you'll be looking at the surveys as they come in and?
I usually do because I'm curious, yeah. And I can see the data. I just look at the data analysis screen. It doesn't stop the survey or anything. They keep coming in. Mm-hmm.
So will you be getting subtotals as you go along?
Yeah.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah, and I can do some filtering. So I can see, I could tell how old people are. I can tell if they have a business or resident, how long they've lived here. I can tell if they have kids in the community. I mean, these are all questions we'd obviously have to ask them, but I can tell who's responding by that. And I can also tell what they're saying.
You're getting a demographic picture.
Yeah.
So in other words, if you found that one section was responding well and others weren't, we could target the non-responders.
Exactly.
To try and get more response from them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just sort of follow up, and Patrick, I'm just thinking of the public forums where we were talking about getting groups of, would it make sense to have each of us and the general public certainly can do that as well. Send you a list of names of people we think should be invited to these public forums so that you have you're sort of the central collection point.
Yeah, I think the more kind of specificity that we can get our hands on relative to who we need to contact, who we need to make sure are participating and providing us with that kind of information is really good. I'm wondering if we would want to set the dates for the forum sooner rather than later, so we can start to make some milestones that we can get in the media. We can get people to to
Absolutely.
start building
Yeah.
mentally toward focusing on that kind of thing. And I also think if they know that a forum's coming, if they get that survey in the mail or however, they're going to be probably a little bit more mentally acute toward how they respond to it.
Patrick, I might have confused you. I was talking really about the focus groups.
That's easy to do.
So, was that what you were responding to? The
Yes.
focus groups?
Yeah. Relative to the focus groups, the more specificity that you can provide me, groups of people, individuals, I think that we have a pretty good cross-section of folks that want to see more development. We have a good cross-section who don't want to see it. I think that we have to get a broad range of the opinions, I think, in each of the group of fives that, that we put together, just because I fear a little bit people thinking that we've preordained some focus in a way that will later have them disenfranchising our results. I really want them to feel like this is their vehicle. This
absolutely.
is their time to tell us.
Speaking personally, I'm not reticent about, asking those who have been most vocally about not wanting any development or not wanting any change or, that whatever. So that's fine. I just wanted to set up an expectation and the logistics of getting those names to you. So the question is, can we send them to you?
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, please do.
And if people who are listening, watching, they should feel free to do so as well.
Okay, so why don't I move on to these exercises, these discussion questions. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave them up just for a moment, but then I'm going to actually shut my computer, take it off the screen because I want to take notes. And I take notes on my computer, and you don't need to see all my misspellings while I'm quickly typing. So these are the 3 questions I'm going to ask you. And it's just, you can be relatively spontaneous about it. And it's up to you if you want to also include folks in the audience. I would welcome that. It's basically, what are your top 3 hopes for this project? What are Hamilton's greatest opportunities for housing? And what are the greatest challenges? So, hopes for the project, opportunities, and challenges. So is it okay if I take this down now? You
Sure,
got that in your head?
as long as you can repeat them verbally.
I can. Yeah, I can. And so as soon as I get my notes up here, you're welcome to just start. So who would like to begin? Yeah.
I think I can think of 2, maybe 3 as I'm talking. One is to develop an independent, objective data platform that reflects what Hamilton is currently in terms of its demographics, its housing stock, so that all of us can be using the same data. That's been one of the big challenges, is everybody has anecdotal information or beliefs based on the people they talk to. and they socialize with, but may or may not reflect reality. So that would be number one. Number two for me would be that it's an educational forum to present that kind of economic data and have an open, honest, frank discussion through the survey and the public forums about where we are as a town and where we want to go. So that would be my second. And third is that we end up with some consensus, general consensus on where the planning board and other public authorities should be headed in terms of housing in Hamilton.
Do you want to do challenges and opportunities now, or do you want to circle back? It doesn't matter to me.
Let's just stay on this one, I think.
Okay.
That way everybody can kind of weigh in. I think one of my big hopes, and it echoes yours a little, is that it brings us together in a positive way, those on various sides of the issues. And I mean, like we've said earlier, it's been so polarizing here the last couple of years with the talk of 40Bs and affordable housing and everything, and we haven't focused on other parts of our housing needs as much. So I really would like this to bring together as many people as possible that are interested in this at all, out and get their opinions, and just like you said, bring it into a forum or a place where it's not so polarizing, and it's just filtered down opinions and facts and so forth, that we can use to build the future on.
Do you want to make sure you're talking?
Yeah, I mean, I guess hope that as many people as possible either take the survey, come to our public forums, as possible. I mean, that's one of the things we've struggled with in some ways in town, is getting people out to these things, these public meetings. Rick and I are on a couple different boards, and we've done a lot of these public meetings over the years, and you might get what we think is a good turnout of 50 people, but that's a pretty small cross-section of the town. So I really hope that this is an issue where everybody, wants to come out and make their voices heard. Those are a good two, I think, and
Okay.
I mean, obviously Rick's are all pointing as well.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the turnover ratio is on houses in this community. I mean, how we hear about a cross-section or a section of the population which come just for schools, and as soon as the kids graduate, they take off and go to Florida or somewhere. And I think it'd be very interesting. We ought to have a couple of realtors in, because they probably know more about that than most of us. And then we have some objective stuff from the assessor's office that we can analyze. And the other thing that I'm interested in is, I just forgot it. I know what Judy taught us when we did the master plan was that the house has to be priced over $1 million, really $1.2 million, to cover the fiscal costs of the burden on the community. And I think that's something that has really discouraged a lot of people, because then it's very hard to focus on, well, let's have a mean price of $350,000 for the houses in our town and so forth, because we always say, well, we're at a loss. We'll never recover our taxes, and from our taxes, the true costs. And so what are some of the other ways that we can adjust it? Because I'm definitely an awful lot of houses, the free market is providing only very costly houses.
I think my hope would be that, I think it's reflected in what the others have said, that we would have a clear idea of the needs, and that across the divides that everybody would hear what those different needs are of their neighbors, and that we would actually come together around a vision of how to meet those needs.
I'm relatively new to the board, so I agree with all the sentiment.
Can you speak into the
Sorry.
microphone?
I'm new to the board, new to town, really, and I agree with all the sentiment, and it's been interesting to watch the discord in town already with just, I mean, people were so confused by the accessory apartment bylaw that everybody thought it was, we were approving something, whereas we were just fixing previous bylaws. So I'm curious to see where else we can take our bylaw to make it more conducive to moving forward. Everything is changing in the world fast, and we have to make sure we don't allow the town to get away, fall behind too far.
Yeah, I think that leads to, my third one is.
Into the microphone.
Sorry, how we can keep the character of our town that everybody loves and a lot of people came here for, but still, providing housing that we need and potentially different types of housing for various different groups. I think that's one of the biggest things you're going to hear is the character of the town. You're going to hear that a lot. So I think, how do we find that happy medium?
Well, maybe, Brian, that's the challenge. And it would be nice if we all took on that challenge as something that could be done and solved if we were creative.
Yeah, part of that is part of what my hope is too. I think open space is a major problem. My hope would be that people get a better understanding of it and of the changes that open space has in terms of where the town is now. For example, we have one guy say that when he first moved to town X many years ago, he could ride his horse from where he lived to pretty much the opposite side of town on the trails, and that's not possible any longer. I think that's indicative of some of the major changes that are going on in this town in terms of the open space. And it's a polarizing problem because the people that are, I'm going to use a strong word and say fanatical about open space, don't want it developed at all. And it's impossible to get any realistic kind of compromise situation done. I also think this idea that people who the people who have very high valued properties are the only ones who are that are basically carrying the costs of the property tax burden. I don't agree with that. I think I think it's in reality spread throughout, and I think people have to understand that, and people pay according to what they're capable of because they live in a home that they're capable of paying for, and they pay their fair share of the property tax burden, and sometimes more because people who are in some of the wealthier properties and larger properties put their property in a conservancy and no longer pay the full tax value of the property, and at the same time nobody can use the property. It's just theirs. One of our board members allows people to go onto his property, and it's in conservancy, and I commend him for that. Other people don't. So those are my hopes and where I'm going.
I might just point out, though, that if you do use a conservation restriction to freeze open land, it doesn't lower your taxes at all. My taxes are exactly the same before or after that event.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I didn't know that.
So, any comments from the audience about what you'd like to see?
I think you got the hopes down. Are you going through the categories?
No, just starting with the first one.
No 40. Let's talk it.
My hope is there's no 40B filed in the next year and a half while Madam Chairman.
Disrupt.
No, I would hope that we would get a clear picture of the data in town, as has been suggested, that about, what the housing stock is, what it pays, so that there's a lot of, I think, misapprehension or misstatements that goes around on all sides, and I think to have sort of an objective picture of the town, what's possible, what's not possible, would be helpful going forward. So,
Bill, while you're up there, I was thinking, I wonder what your reaction or what your expectation is on the new accessory apartment bylaw, because
Let's not get into that right now.
what?
Yeah, let's not go down.
Well,
that road.
We got to focus.
Well, what I'm saying is that it may, let's say, 20 single residential units are adding apartments every year. That's going to change the stock of people living and age groups and so forth. I think it's a goal that we age in place and a lot of people can have apartments, but.
well, maybe it will, but I mean that was when the last of the 4 accessory apartment sections in the old bylaw was adopted a few years ago. That was one of the hopes, and certainly it's been used, but basically the under the old setup, there was a maximum of 12 a year, and that was one of the findings that we had to make when we allowed the special permit, and we never came close to 12 in a year, or it was in a 12-month period. So that's possible. We'll see, but historically.
Case though.
I'm sorry.
I think that's no longer the case.
Well, how
But
would you-
but we'll see how many.
Not go down that.
We can't go down these roads.
Yeah.
We'll see how many we get.
and know that
No, no,
we're
no.
not change the whole bylaw.
They know.
This is not relevant to where we're going now. You're going into the weeds on a specific issue. We're trying to talk about global issues.
I think it will overtake you.
So I'd like to echo the data sets. So we have a little bit of a challenge. It's 2018, the last census is 10 years ago. So we have a disconnect, 8 years age on our data set. The Secretary of State in our town has its own data sets, but it's hard to sort of stream them forward. So getting to the same place with who we are, what's our profile, what's our demographics, is going to be important in 2018 because we're starting it so late. So that's going to be important. We know the housing stuff really well. The assessor's database says, we can look at what the average tenure is, how many people sell per year. It's about 50 to 80 third-party sales a year, 110, 120 if you include related party sales. So it's not a huge number on a 2,700 housing stock overall piece. It's no more than 4% of our housing stock changes every year. It's like 8% in other communities and in other states. So we don't change that quickly, but it's really important that we have the same data set, that the community understands it, that will actually give it perspective. Because if you're talking about having a bylaw that allows, oh my God, 40 cluster housing stuff, we're like, wait, 40 over 2,700, it's a small percentage, right? So maybe it's not going to change the character of the town because it's such a small piece. So understanding how it can contribute, and that'll tell us what to overreact to and what to underreact to. So I mean, I'm really looking forward to the common data sets, the commonplace, the education that comes with it, because once we get that information, sharing it with the community so people can buy into it, it's going to be important. And I think that'll help the public discourse when we then go to come up with the solutions.
So how about the next two, challenges and opportunities?
I'm always an optimist, so I always feel like a challenge is an opportunity. So I would say, you know, this desire to keep the character of the town yet to serve the needs of population is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And we should be able to do it.
I think, sorry, I think the biggest challenge for you is going to be getting past the whole 40B issue and getting people to listen to anything else. I mean, that was my impression for the 2 years I've lived here. That's really the only thing you hear about in town when it comes to housing. You know, and how do we get people to sit around a room like this and not talk about that, but also talk about the fact that, you know, the housing situation is 4% turnover is really hard. It was hard for us to move into town when we were trying to move into town. So
I think our biggest challenge is going to be to get people to respond to the survey. And I think it's an opportunity to learn more ways of getting to people and finding out how to get them to respond to things like the survey, because we had very poor turnouts for town meeting. We've been getting consistently and steadily poorer and poorer turnouts for elections of town people in the April election.
Again, one of the challenges is going to be to really get people to think broadly about all kinds of different housing types, and how they could possibly fit into this town. I mean, you mentioned the term even apartments or apartment building of more than one or two, and some people can just freak out over that it might happen in this town. So I think that's a big one. It's terminology, like you said earlier, with affordable versus attainable versus whatever. But I also think that, you know, one of our greatest opportunities is, you know, there's a lot of land in town that isn't developed, and I know our open space is fairly sacred, but, you know, again, there's a balance there that we need to find, and we're never gonna have a consensus, but we need to find somehow that balance of what we need to development-wise to sustain our town and to keep us on an upward path of growing a little bit and keeping our tax base or our tax rate in check, while also preserving, you know, the open space that we have or some of that open space that we have. And, you know, so those are my two greatest opportunities and challenges, but you know, in getting around this density issue that we hear a lot about, where everybody's like, oh, well, downtown is already kind of dense, let's just keep putting more and more and more down there. And, you know, I live down there, and it's, you know, it can only take so much, right? It's already kind of dense. So, you know, we have to get over that and you know, get people to realize that it, you know, especially with, you know, this happened with the 40B, we talked about spreading around smaller projects as they come, or smaller affordable housing projects. And I think that's going to be one of the things that'll come up is where should things go? Where should certain types of housing go? Now that we're going to be discussing them, so I think that's going to be another big one.
I think a challenge is, as Brian had mentioned, is dealing with density with our general public. But I also think that one of the most important things that, you know, really hasn't come up and we haven't really discussed is how good design helps to address density. And that's been a absolutely, completely MIA kind of part of the discussion, which a lot of sites can really handle density really well. Obviously, we've got our community works with septic systems, so that's one of the major governing factors, but I really think that, you know, good design, responsive to landforms, and good design that is tucked behind vegetation and topography, we really haven't talked about, because we've been fighting so much over the density part of the discussion, that I think that's a major opportunity.
Yeah, no, I'll follow on that. I think you're right. The biggest challenge we have is the fear of any change is bad. And it's generally assumed that whatever change comes is going to come in huge, uncontrollable increments, despite the recent history and of what we've seen happen in town. And I think the opportunity, as Patrick said, is, and maybe this can be included as part of the education element, is to how have other similar towns embraced change, including design, density, so that people can see that whatever proposed bylaws or that may bring change in density or design or development has actually been accommodated in similar situations in a way that was complementary to the community.
Maybe it's even starting to understand that bylaws are the thing that shapes what happens, but it's not something that stops change, but it shapes it in a way that fits with the community overall.
On the challenge side, one of them is moderating our own expectations. So we'll have, we'll have these ideas of some bylaws. The surveys will say people want certain type of housing, but the town doesn't own the open space land. The land is owned by private individuals, and they want it open space. It's going to stay open space. If their children or if whoever inherits it wants it open space, it'll stay open space. That's not a problem. State law lets them do that. Federal law lets them do that. We have no desire to take anybody's land away. So the question is going to be, how do we put in place bylaws that are an incentive to the default for us, which is just single-family homes, which is a subdivision. And so, if we want more subdivisions, which actually looks a lot like what the town is, perhaps, we don't have to do anything, because our bylaws, that's what our bylaws allow us to do, and it's the only thing people can do, pretty much by right. So the challenge is going to be finding a balance between the types of incentives that allow people to do something other than single-family homes with their land, but don't create so much incentive that we're encouraging people to take that open space out of service and turn it into something else. So we're going to have to find that balance and recognize that we could have all the social policies we want, all the objectives, but it's really, we're laying out a bunch of policies and a bunch of ideas for the community, but the velocity that something happens at is going to be a function of the landowners and what they want to do. So that's going to, so we have to sort of moderate our own expectations.
Anybody else? Okay, so you've given me a ton of information, and I'm glad you don't see my typing because I made a lot of mistakes, but I'll fix them. So that was very helpful. I like to start off a project really getting a sense. I think I have a much better sense now of issues, opportunities, and your hopes for the project than I did walking into the room. So thank you for that. It was like a cram session for me, and it's helpful as we start to dig into the data to have these things that you've talked about already in mind. So you've given us a jump start. And so, that's everything that I wanted to cover with you tonight, but I didn't know if you wanted to ask me any questions or talk to me about anything else. I'm happy to talk more.
Question?
I noticed somewhere in there that you talk a lot about open space, and the town has had an open space in Recreation Committee that got just so far on the open space and recreation plan, and then the Board of Selectmen decided to change the committee and form a new committee. And I'm going to be one of the planning board rep to that committee. I'm wondering how much and I know this is a loaded question, but how much interchange and interplay is there going to be between an open space and rec plan and what you come up with a master plan? In general terms, if you can give me some information, that would be helpful.
Sure. You know, it's a little different if I were creating the whole master plan at once, because our process would be more integrated with all of the other elements, would be all under our hat, and we'd be really thinking about the town as these systems. But because what you've asked me to do is not just a housing plan, but the portion of the master plan that relates to housing, I still view that it's important to coordinate and integrate the other elements to the extent that we can. Obviously, our scope is different in terms of we're not looking at the existing conditions and the trends and the issues and opportunities and all these other elements. But if the community's done some work on updating an open space plan, even if it's in draft form, that would be helpful for us to have if there's a way to share that with us.
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah. And that's something that we certainly, you know, when we look at goals and balancing, you know, the tensions between, like I said, community progress and preservation, part of what we're talking about is open space conservation, historic preservation. You can look at community character in lots of different ways. And it's important to balance the housing needs with all of these other things. And so it's going to be, you know, our challenge as consultants to figure out how can we still think about all these systems even though we're not charged with developing elements for those other systems, those other pieces of the system. But certainly housing is related to all of those things. So I'm not trying to give you the runaround. I don't have a very straightforward answer for you, but the short answer is we would be thinking of all of these things, but in a different way than if we were doing a full master plan.
No, I realized it was a loaded question, and I didn't expect a definitive answer, but anything you can tell me would be well accepted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from the rest of the board?
I'd be interested to know how you estimate demand for housing. Is it market driven? Is it regulation partly driven, or?
I often look at the demographic projections,
Yep.
and there are different methodologies, and we can debate which ones to use and how real do we think they are. But often that's what we have the most to go on is the projections of who, you know, given birth, death, and migration rates, who's going to be living in this community, who's moving out of this community, and what type of population will you have. And so we also look at regional demographics and demand as well, because you're a small town, part of a larger region, and the region certainly impacts your demographics.
Definitely.
And so that's what we look more at, although, you know, we do look at housing cost data, sales data, sales per year, but really when we look at looking at demand, we look at what kind of demographic changes are you going to be seeing.
One of the things that has disappointed me is that we in this town don't seem to have a smoothly operating, people leave their house and they can go to there's a supply of smaller houses to go to, or their children leave and then they can go to another, and that people say they want to stay in town, but they can't find the house that would satisfy them for their stage in life. I don't know whether when you collect the data about demographics of family size and so forth, you can make a prediction about how it should work more smoothly than I think it does.
Well, we can certainly, you know, what we typically do is look at your housing stock in comparison to the needs of the demographic, you know, and some people, you know, clearly want to age in their house, And that's, something we have in mind as well. But others want to age in the community, but they find, for whatever reason, could be mobility issues. It could just be don't really want to maintain a single-family home anymore. Could be lots of different reasons, wanting to downsize, find a smaller home, maybe a condo. I don't know. But we know some of the typical trends and preferences of people in different life stages. It's not, we generalize, and of course each individual may have different preferences, but we have some general trends that we look at, and we can look at the type of housing stock that you have in the community and how diverse is that housing stock. And so we make some claims about how well does your existing housing stock meet the needs of the current population, but also what we think the projections are indicating.
And I'm hoping you're going to get a lot of this information from some of the survey and the groups and so forth. I hope that I hope there's a big cross section of people that come out and state exactly what you're saying, right? What they would want in terms of their housing needs in 10 years or now or whenever. So
I think that should be a product, and hopefully it is a product of the survey. Is, for example, where do you, if you are planning on staying in town, where do you
Yes.
What do you envision as a housing option that would satisfy your needs? I think that would help get at your question, is get people to think about not only, well, the data sets will tell us what we have now, but what we're trying to get at, and what we sometimes think we're trying to get at, but may or may not be successful about it, is that what we think people want, and what we want, and what we see people are telling us, the few people that we talk to, not the 7,000 people that live in town. That's part of the challenge of this whole thing is we live in a microcosm, and it's all issue driven. And depending on the issue, you'll get a certain subset of people that come out, maybe 40, 50, 60, and that's it. We don't know what the rest of the town wants.
Right, and the other challenge, I guess, to go back a little bit is that, a while back we had taken a survey the selectmen did about a broad range of things in town, and one of them was cottage housing, and there's a pretty sizable demand for cottage housing based on that survey, and it was a pretty substantial amount of people that answered that survey. But then so we developed it, public meetings, all that, take it to town meeting and voted down, and pretty handily. So that's the challenge I see, is that you might have a fair amount of people that, and this goes back to your point, Richard, you have a fair amount of people that might want something, but not everybody comes out to vote, right? Not everybody comes to
What
town.
might be interesting, I'm just thinking about the survey, and we can craft this in many different ways. We could actually, as one of our general demographic type questions, ask them how regularly they attend town meeting, and we can filter their answers by, are they regular town meeting? You have an open town meeting, right?
They even know what the town meeting is.
But we could see if their answers are different depending on whether they're a regular town meeting member or not. Just curious, that what you said made me curious about, do people who regularly attend have different opinions, maybe? I don't know.
Maybe just by asking the question, you encourage them to go to the town meeting.
Maybe. Oh, and by the way, did you know the next town meeting is? Yeah.
It's definitely, it's a fascinating subject when you sit on the side of a soccer field or walking, talking to people around town and people who live in town and who even knows what's going on in town meetings and who has no interest and who really wants to be part of it. So, and it's all based on the demographic. So I know a single,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
which is
Absolutely.
incredible.
Yep.
And how do you handle the two big affordable housing that we have in town that doesn't get counted because of the religious aspect? How does that go into the whole study?
What is the housing?
Well, we have the
Asbury Grove.
Asbury Grove, which is in Gordon, and then the Gordon Conwell Seminary. That has two huge population centers that we're not allowed to count towards a demographic in one aspect, but we have to count it in demographic in terms of paying for the school.
Right.
So I'd be curious how other towns handle that, how we may handle it going forward.
Or if they even have any representative part of their population in that kind of a housing system.
There are a lot of communities that have populations that don't count
Yeah.
The state just recently allowed trailer homes, for example, to count, whereas they didn't count for a while, so, I mean, we're not the only community with a subset of population that doesn't count towards a 40B.
I'm just more curious how it's discussed when she pulls all the data sets together, how it comes into play.
Yeah, I think just that's going to be probably a point of contention, even though we're seeking objective, independent data, is expect challenges, well, gee, that's not the most recent data. We have a lot of well-educated, informed people, or they have their own subjective beliefs based on the information they see. So that's going to be a challenge, is getting people to say, okay, yes, this information is substantiated. It's the basis upon which all decisions are made in all towns, or in general government. It's imperfect information, but it's a snapshot of where we are based on the best information available. I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, because everybody, and as somebody once said, everybody's an expert in planning. So that will be a challenge.
Great.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. So I won't see you for a while, but you'll be getting work products from me, and I'll be in touch with Patrick, and we'll try to pin down those dates. Maybe over the next week or so, we can pin down the public forum dates, and so why don't you and I try to be in touch by phone sometime soon.
Quick question. Will we get a chance to preview the survey questions?
If you want to, let me think about, so if we're releasing at the end of December, what we could do is send you a draft before whenever your prior meeting is.
Yeah.
We'll have to look at your meeting dates.
Yeah.
We could send you a draft of the questions, to line up with a meeting if you want to put it on the agenda to consider.
I would love to be able to see them
Sure.
beforehand.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Not that we want to skew any kind of objective scientific formula, but there may be questions that we think might be better asked,
Yep.
or
That's fine.
better
We're
kn-
happy to share that, yeah.
Okay.
When would you like to see the draft of the open space plan?
Send it to us.
Soon.
Soon.
So as soon as you could send it to Patrick, and maybe, or however you want to get it to me. I didn't bring
I'll
business
coordinate
cards
with Patrick.
tonight, so, okay.
Thank you.
And the same with names for the,
So the names, I think that you should start coordinating. I'm not going to pay that much attention to that
no,
until December, but in terms of lining it up, yeah.
Yeah, that shouldn't take too long. I think we all know enough in the cross sections to come up with a good list.
okay?
There's going to be a tour on the 5th,
On the 5th. Yeah.
That's correct.
starting here
Started here.
and at 2 o'clock? I don't-
12:30.
12:30, okay.
We need to adjourn.
We do.
I make a motion that the planning board adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned?
We are adjourned.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Too.
And away we go.
And away.
Good night, Bill.
I'm doing this for Shore now too, for their facilities. They want a master plan for the facility.
For what?
Our private school.